There are a lot of vocal factions of the country music community. There's the traditionalists that only want you to play old Hank Williams songs. There are the pop country embracers that will insist that Danny Shea and Cassidy Pope are just as country as Merle Haggard. There are the Zach Bryan or bust teenagers that have just discovered the world of independent country, and frankly, they're pissed it took them this long. There are Canadian country fans, and they have their own whole thriving country music scene, and I really feel like some person should do what I do on this channel for the Canadian country scene. And then there are Texas fans. Texas country music fans are a different breed. They are incredibly passionate. There is an entire gigantic scene of Texas country music where they have these huge shows, these massive fan bases, and their own celebrity superstars like Cody Johnson or Aaron Watson, not to mention the Randy Rogers Band, Casey Donahue, Josh Abbott Band, Wade Bowen, and so many others. They might be off the radar from Music Row and from a lot of the mainstream country music scene. They might not always have these beautiful glossy music videos, but all the same, these guys are absolutely crushing it out there in Texas, and they have audiences that many mainstream stars would kill to have. So today's video is just gonna be exploring that scene and looking at what makes the Texas country music scene so great. Before we get into it, just let me say, I'm not from Texas. I know I'm not from Texas. If you are a musicologist that is obsessed with the minutia of this scene, this might not be the video for you. This is gonna be a kind of broad overview from an outsider's perspective of what is making so much great music and so much great energy emanate out of Texas. Grab your boots, go do-si-do a cowgirl or something, and let's travel down to Texas to start this video. I got 6 big reasons mapped out for what makes Texas country music special, and number 1 is the state of Texas itself. On a very shallow level, Texans like Texan things.
Yeah, man, Texas is a good state to live in, man. I mean, the weather's great, everything's great. Everything's bigger in Texas.
I know this. I lived with a Texan in college. He was from Dallas. And there's a certain state pride that drives not just the small business community in Texas, which I think is completely admirable, but also their music scene. Texan people like supporting their own. And even though that can come across super arrogant in one conversation,
barbecue was created by Texas. I don't care what nobody say. Don't let nobody lie to you. Even if they found proof that it was created somewhere else, you always say Texas made it.
Other times, there's something super beautiful and compelling about it too. Like, I love my area that I live in, Virginia. We've got the best view of the Blue Ridge, but you're not hearing many people sing about loving being from Virginia, and frankly, I'm a little bit jealous. Which brings me to a sub-point of that point, which is that so many songs in the Texas scene are set in a geographical context. On this new Panhandlers record, which is like the Avengers of Texas country music, the guys on that, you're hearing mentions of cactuses and prickly pears and tumbleweeds. You listen to an Aaron Watson song, he might be singing about the blue bonnets on the side of the road. There's a phrase you hear a lot in music criticism, which is, the more specific, the more universal. And I feel like there are so many specifics, so many little mentions of natural areas, or maybe a specific honky-tonk dive bar where people are going to in the lyrics of these songs that they immediately root you in a place, even if you've never been to that place. Number 2, and this is probably the biggest takeaway in this whole video, is that the entire Texas country scene is built around the live music experience. If you talk to most people in Nashville, they will tell you that the country music industry is built around radio airplay. And although Texas does have their own radio airplay charts and their own stations that are playing a lot of these artists, in general, the main motivating factor is live shows. It's figuring out a way to get on stage and play in dance halls and honky-tonk bars all across the state.
At Billy Bob's, we provide our guests with an unforgettable experience loaded with toe-tapping music and fun. The world's largest honky-tonk offers food, dancing, shopping, games, and bull riding.
And I think that means the music is pretty naturally playful because a lot of it is honed in on, a lot of it is perfected in the presence of other people where bands can see, oh, that line got a laugh. Oh, people really responded to this song that I sang. A lot of the sounds that are present in mainstream country music are things like snap tracks or this giant drop on the chorus that I always call a wall of sound. I think those are there to maybe hook the commuters that are sitting in traffic on their way to work, that are just scanning through stations and need something recognizable to make them stop. But I find that there's a lot more instrumentation present on so much of the music coming out of the Texas country scene. There's a reason you'll hear fiddle all through a Flatland Cavalry song. There's a reason you're gonna hear a bunch of steel and a bunch of noodling guitar licks all through an Aaron Watson song. And it's because those things are fun to experience live, and so much Texas country music is fun to experience live. I also think there's an earnestness, a straightforwardness, a flirtatiousness to a lot of Texas country music that makes it feel really fun. And I think that's because it's supposed to grease the wheels of social interaction, because often it's getting played around pretty young people in a bar. And don't get me wrong, it's not all just little bars that these artists are playing in. The Texas country touring infrastructure is incredible. It's enviable. I feel like there are so many musicians from so many different scenes that could look down at Texas and say, damn, you can go from just playing like a little cover gig at a bar to headlining at some dance hall to one day playing amphitheaters and arenas. There's all sorts of size venues. And what's really cool is the localized nature of the Texas touring scene. A lot of those artists don't have to go further than like 6-7 hours from their home, and they're still in Texas and they're killing it. There's a downside to that too. I think a lot of those artists are surprised how few people know who they are and might have to eat a little piece of humble pie when they come to Virginia or something and are like, damn, I'm playing to a crowd of 150 people. That said, I still think it's a very, very, very good thing to have extreme touring capabilities and a real hunger for live shows in the state where they're from. Speaking of live shows, let's get into the third point, and that is rodeo culture. All the way back in 1935, there was a song by Patsy Montana called I Want to Be a Cowboy Sweetheart. It was actually the very first country song by a woman to ever sell over 1 million copies. She's longing for being in the plains of the desert out in Texas and finding a cowboy, and I would say in the nearly 100 years since that song has been released, that sentiment has remained very strong among a ton of fans.
I want everybody to have fun on this next song. It's one of my favorite Patsy Montana tunes called Cowboy Sweetheart.
There's a lot of ladies that want to go be a cowboy sweetheart at the rodeo. There's a lot of guys that want to ride on the back of a bucking bronco and see how long they can stay there. And there's just a ton of people in general that want to sit in a big arena and watch all the craziness. I don't know if you've ever been to a rodeo. I've only done it once, and I will say that mutton busting is one of the strangest things I've ever watched. And country music's got a history of performers that are funding their rodeo habit through playing music. The most famous of those performers is the late Chris Ledoux, who had hits like This Cowboy's Hat, and very famously added in pyrotechnics and real drama to his stage show. Back in the day, Garth Brooks was actually an audience member at one of those iconic Chris Ledoux rodeo shows, and he's even told the magazine American Cowboy, I stole my whole act from Chris. The two of them also ended up becoming friends. They even released a song called What You Gonna Do with a Cowboy together in the 90s. But these days, even though you can still catch Garth Brooks on the road when he announces one of his cities and see him running around the stage, I think the energy of rodeo culture and Chris Ledoux is best captured in the superstardom of Cody Johnson. Not to take anything away from the king himself, George Strait, but if you were to ask this next generation of Texas country fans who the king of the scene is, I'm pretty sure they would tell you Cody Johnson. Cody is an ex-bull rider who really personifies rowdiness in his stage show. And that makes sense to me, because if you can get used to being thrown around by a giant, angry, insane bull, then yeah, you're probably good enough to jump around the stage and thrill some fans for a while. It helps that Cody Johnson has a huge belting voice and amazing songs like Dear Rodeo. And people appreciate his authenticity. A lot of people. He sold 74,000 tickets in one night at a stadium show at the Houston Rodeo. But it wasn't until very recently that he started getting acknowledged in the mainstream country music conversation. He recently signed a big distribution deal with Warner Music Nashville, so you'll hear songs like On My Way to You on stations across the country. So credit where credit is due to the folks in Nashville that are starting to see there's something very special, very big happening down there, and we want in on it. There's a similar thing happening with super buzzy Texas artists like Randall King and Parker McCollum that are now getting major label attention in the mainstream as well. But yeah, my main point with rodeos is that it's essentially like what I was saying with the live music experience. It's just kind of the bigger, rowdier version of that. Texas just offers a lot of unique opportunities to hear music in a live setting, and I think that's very good. Point number 4. Texas weirdly absorbs the Oklahoma and red dirt scene. Oklahomans, don't get triggered. I'm not saying this to take anything away from your vibrant, wonderful Stillwater music scene. But the fact that there's great music being made in Oklahoma and great music being made in Texas, and they border each other, they're kind of merged into a single scene at this point. And these days, it's very common to hear people like me refer to the Texas/red dirt scene as if it's one thing, but for a while, it wasn't. Like, you can go way into the origins of red dirt and look at John Fulbright and look at Cody Canada and his time with Cross Canadian Ragweed, even the rise of Turnpike Troubadours. It's this crazy, exciting thing that happened in Oklahoma. I'm actually really excited to read this book called Red Dirt by Josh Crutchmer that's coming out very soon. This is like the comprehensive guide to the red dirt scene, and I think it's out in like a month. But it makes sense that a lot of the people from that scene would want to tour outside of Oklahoma, and as they make their way down to Texas, they start making friends with some of the people in the Texas scene. You'll then see Jamie Lin Wilson suddenly singing with Evan Felker, even as she is good friends with Aaron Watson. And Aaron Watson's kind of a nice guy, and Evan Felker's kind of a bad boy, but now, hey, there's this little web connecting everybody. And even though I think you could argue that red dirt is a little more rock influenced and Texas country is a little more country influenced, I think they share a similar DIY ethos. And it's that attitude of we can do this our own way, we can do this ourselves, that make them really natural bedfellows. The number 5 thing that I think makes this scene special is independent artistry and an outlaw attitude. There's a really famous song called Fence Post in which Aaron Watson says,
"Rather be an old fence post in Texas than the king of Tennessee." Can I get an amen?
and that's a sentiment against big corporate business that you're gonna hear in a lot of Texas country songwriting. Even on a track like This Ain't My Town from this new Hold My Beer Volume 2 record by Wade Bowen and Randy Rogers, they're frustrated by some of the corporate developments in Texas. One by one, they're tearing down the dance halls, bringing in that California gold, running off all the hippies and the outlaws. They don't know the cost of what's been sold. So in either case, whether they're pointing the finger at people in Nashville or at people in Austin, there is a certain renegade vibe that runs through the attitude of Texas country music.
Cause God knows I'd never sell my soul to rock and roll or rap or wear those tight-fitting skinny jeans.
There's a clear independent way of thinking, or working against the system rather than working with the system, that's really fun to follow. And even if that becomes a system in its own right, it still evokes the spirit of like Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings, and it is really engaging. It's compelling. It's fun to be a fan of and feel like I'm part of something, and it's not the same thing that everyone else is a part of. You look at the don't give an F attitude of someone like Cody Johnson, it's interesting.
Gonna take my horse down Old Town Road. If that's country music, I will line up after this show and I will kiss every last single one of y'all's ass.
You look at that same attitude in someone like Koe Wetzel, who is a fairly inscrutable character out of the Texas country scene, who's not even especially country. It is fascinating. It feels like he's got two middle fingers up to the world, like he's constantly trolling us all, and then releasing these bangers of rock songs. The same outlaw energy that makes those guys exciting also makes people from the Appalachian scene, people like Tyler Childers or Sturgill Simpson, makes people from outside of Texas like Zach Bryan way more likely to appear on playlists alongside all these Texas country artists. And I think it's the independent attitude and outlaw perspective of so many of these performers that makes them naturally grouped together. And then sixth, and this is the most important point to me, is the exemplary songwriting. Now, I definitely think there are some guys in the Texas country scene that aren't all that. And people send me music sometimes, and it just feels like this dude's trying to dress like Parker McCollum, has a flat brim and a gold chain over some oversized t-shirt, and he's singing love songs that aren't that good and feel like they could just be made on mainstream country radio, and I don't get it. But in general, I think there's a level of quality songwriting and honesty that is so present on so many songs out of the Texas country scene. I feel like the god king of Texas country songwriting is Guy Clark. You'll even hear tributes to him sometimes on Texas country albums. But then you think of the incisive songwriting of someone like Jamie Lin Wilson, and the devastating lyrics on a song like Death and Life. The children in the graveyard, they're just jumping over rocks. You think of the wordplay in a song like Pretty Women by Flatland Cavalry.
Little shade of ruby, red Revlon lip liner.
You get all those R sounds, and you get all those L sounds, and you're just like, oh, it's so good. You hear the harsh self-reflection on something like Bad Guy by Casey Donahue.
Baby, I'm just a bad guy, I don't know why.
Or the laughter in a song like Songs About Trucks by Wade Bowen.
Don't play no songs about trucks. drugs.
Or you look at the songwriting of Sonny Sweeney or Willie Nelson or all of this legacy of great Texas country artists, and it's hard not to just be blown away by the quality of these songs. On a very simple level, I think a lot of the songwriting is still extremely image-based. It feels like, this is something that Charlie Stout, my buddy, taught me. It feels like people are taking a camera and showing you what they're singing about. They're not just saying, she's my ride or die baby. They're describing her with images. There's so many artists in the Texas scene that I think are worthy of your attention, but at the end of this video, I just want to name a couple names that either I really want you to check out or that you guys really want me to check out, and that makes it clear to me like there's something going on with this artist that I need to dive deeper into. So it's just kind of like, who's happening in the Texas country scene right now? Because I feel like I've mentioned a lot of the big names in this video, but there's a handful of younger artists too. And so the first one I want to say in that list are my kind of like overall MVPs. They sit up in the corner of my videos, Flatland Cavalry. They're like my favorite band out of the Texas scene. If you like music that is pretty but sensitive but playful all at the same time, I think you're gonna love Flatland Cavalry. I also would recommend checking out Caitlin Butts. She is romantically involved with the lead singer Cleto Cordero of Flatland Cavalry, and she is amazing in her own right. You can actually hear them together singing on A Life Where We Work Out, which I think is probably the easiest way to red pill a pop country fan into checking out the Texas country scene. If you want to veer more into a southern rock sound, I really recommend Reed Southall. You guys are always blowing me up to check him out. The same could be said about Colby Cooper, who is newly on my radar, but definitely has a rock edge in his sound. Then there's the pair of very good friends, Parker McCollum and Koe Wetzel, that people just love to love. Parker is maybe the more cosmopolitan looking and sounding of the two. Koe Wetzel is the rough around the edges crazy one of the two, but there's something in there for everyone. And I could mention John Bauman and the Panhandlers and William Clark Green. I could go deeper into Sonny Sweeney. I mean, there's so many people I could mention here in this video, but that's all the rabbit hole, guys. I'm just trying to lead you to the rabbit hole. I'm just trying to be the bridge from Nashville to Texas and say like, hey, this is a whole thing happening over here. You can go explore for yourself. But I just felt like I needed to have a moment on the channel that was sort of a dedicated Texas video and just acknowledge this is a big scene. It's one that I really, really have been thankful to find, and it has been a major part of my evolution as an independent country music fan, is just discovering, wow, there's all these people doing it their own way, and I want to be a part of that. That's it for me, you guys. I'd love to know who some of your favorite Texas country music artists are. I'd love to know if that is a world you have really explored. I'd love to know if when going to a wedding in Texas, you were ever dragged to Waco and had to wait for 3 hours for brunch at the Magnolia table because the girls you were with were really big fans of Joanna Gaines. I'd love to know all of those things in the comments down below. Leave this video a like, send it to your Texas friend if you want, and I will be back with more country music coverage very soon.